How could she do this to me? I muttered, my hands trembling as I gripped the printed emails tight enough to crumple the pages. My heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I was supposed to be enjoying a relaxing evening with Ethan's family, but instead, I found myself in Meredith's study, staring at incontrovertible proof of her malicious intent to destroy my career. The woman I had welcomed into my life as a future aunt-in-law was secretly plotting my professional demise, all because she didn't approve of my humble background. The sound of laughter from the living room snapped me back to reality. I took a deep breath and smoothed the papers, tucking them back into the folder. Meredith would pay for her treachery, but I needed to play my cards right. As I rejoined the gathering, Ethan flashed me a warm smile, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. "There you are, babe. Aunt Meredith was just telling us about her latest business venture." Meredith turned to me, her perfectly groomed appearance concealing the viper within. "Marlene, darling, you simply must hear about this exciting new project. I was just telling Ethan how it would benefit from your engineering expertise." The sweetness in her tone made my skin crawl, but I forced a polite smile. "That sounds wonderful, Meredith. I'd love to discuss it further." Her calculating gaze met mine, and I swear I could see the wheels turning in her devious mind. Little did she know, I was already plotting my counterattack. "Of course, dear, but first, a toast!" Meredith raised her glass, and the others followed suit. "To family and the bright future ahead for you and Ethan." As the crystal clinked, I lifted my glass, my eyes locked on Meredith's. "To family," I echoed, my voice dripping with unspoken venom. The battle lines were drawn. Meredith had declared war, but she had no idea what she was up against. I was no wilting flower, and by the time this was over, her pristine reputation would lie in tatters. Ethan's hand found mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You okay?" he whispered, his brow furrowed with concern. I leaned in and planted a tender kiss on his cheek. "Never better," I lied, squeezing his hand back. This was only the beginning. Meredith's downfall would be my greatest achievement, and I would savor every moment of her undoing. She had awoken a fury within me that would not be sated until justice was served. The grand ballroom sparkled with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the impeccably dressed guests. But beneath the glamour, a sinister undercurrent rippled, one that threatened to upend the entire evening. "Marlene, darling, you look ravishing." Meredith cooed as she approached, her ruby-red lips curled into a saccharine smile. "Though I must say, that dress seems a tad understated for such an occasion." My fingers tightened around the champagne flute, the urge to hurl it at her smug face nearly overwhelming me. But I reined in my fury, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Why, thank you, Meredith. I prefer to let my inner beauty shine." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her devious mind. Inner beauty? How quaint. Before I could respond, Ethan appeared at my side, slipping an arm around my waist. "There you are, babe. Doesn't she look stunning, Aunt Meredith?" Meredith's gaze flickered between us, her false smile unwavering. "Of course, dear, though I can't help but wonder if that modest little number was perhaps ill-advised for tonight's festivities." My grip on the flute tightened further, the crystal digging into my palm. Ethan, bless his oblivious heart, simply chuckled. "Nonsense, Aunt Meredith. Marlene's beauty shines through no matter what she wears." He leaned in, brushing a tender kiss against my cheek. "You're the most gorgeous woman here." For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to bask in his affection, pushing aside the tempest of rage simmering within me. But Meredith's pointed clearing of her throat shattered the tranquility. "Well, we mustn't keep the guests waiting any longer," she declared, her tone cloyingly sweet. "Shall we make our grand entrance?" Ethan beamed, ushering us toward the ballroom doors. As we stepped into the spotlight, a hush fell over the crowd, and I plastered on my brightest smile, determined to play the role of the blushing bride-to-be. But as Meredith took the microphone, her perfectly manicured talons curling around the stem, I knew the real battle was only just beginning. "Friends, family, esteemed guests," she began, her voice ringing out over the hushed ballroom. "We gather here tonight to celebrate the union of my beloved nephew, Ethan, and his fiancée, Marlene." The way she uttered my name, dripping with thinly veiled disdain, sent a chill down my spine. But I held my head high, matching her steely gaze with one of my own. While their backgrounds may differ, Meredith continued, her perfectly painted lips curling into a condescending smirk, we welcome Marlene into our elite circle with open arms. The crowd applauded politely, but I could sense the undercurrent of judgment rippling through the well-heeled guests. Meredith's veiled barbs had found their mark, and in that moment I vowed to make her pay dearly for her blatant disrespect. As the evening wore on, I played the part of the gracious future bride, schmoozing and mingling with the upper crust while silently cataloging every slight, every dismissive glance, and every backhanded compliment hurled my way. Little did they know, their contempt only fueled the fire burning within me. By the time the night drew to a close, I had amassed an arsenal of grievances, each one stoking the flames of my vengeful fury. Meredith had thrown down the gauntlet, challenging me to rise above my humble roots. Little did she realize I was more than ready to meet her challenge head-on, and when the dust settled, her precious elite circle would crumble at my feet. The sleek office tower loomed before me, its gleaming glass facade a testament to the power and prestige it housed. But as I strode through the revolving doors, my heart pounded with a mixture of dread and determination. "Good morning, Miss Carter," the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Mr. Holbrook is expecting you in his office." I nodded curtly, my throat constricting as I made my way down the familiar hallway. This was the path I'd walked countless times, my heels clicking against the marble floors with purpose and pride. But today, an ominous cloud hung overhead, casting a shadow over my once bright future. Steeling myself, I rapped my knuckles against the imposing oak door. "Come in." The gruff command echoed through the wood, and I took a steadying breath before entering. Jack Holbrook, my former boss, sat behind his massive desk, his brow furrowed as he shuffled through a stack of papers. "Have a seat, Marlene." The use of my first name sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a friendly chat. This was the executioner's block. I lowered myself into the plush leather chair, my spine ramrod straight as I met his gaze head-on. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Holbrook's expression remained impassive as he slid a folder across the desk. "These are the reports detailing your recent project failures, costly oversights, missed deadlines, shoddy workmanship, the list goes on." My heart stuttered in my chest as I flipped through the pages, a mixture of confusion and disbelief washing over me. "But these can't be right. I've triple-checked every calculation, every specification. My work has been exemplary." "That's not what the numbers show," Holbrook countered, his tone clipped and professional. "Nor is it the assessment of our corporate oversight committee." The mention of the infamous committee, a shadowy cabal of faceless executives, sent a shiver down my spine. I opened my mouth to protest, but Holbrook raised a hand, effectively silencing me. "I'm afraid the decision has been made, Marlene. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." The words hung in the air, their weight crushing me like a ton of bricks. My vision blurred as I fought back the tears of humiliation and injustice burning in my eyes. But why? After all my years of dedicated service, how could you just let me go like this? Holbrook's expression softened ever so slightly, a flicker of regret passing across his weathered features. "It's out of my hands. The committee's ruling is final." My mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation, a rationale, anything to make sense of this nightmare. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the realization struck me. Meredith. The vile woman had made good on her threat, using her vast wealth and influence to sabotage me, to strip away everything I'd worked so hard to build. The mere thought of her smug, self-satisfied smirk sent a wave of fury crashing over me, but I bit back the torrent of rage threatening to spill forth. Instead, I rose to my feet, my hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at my sides. "I see," I ground out through gritted teeth. "Well, I won't take this lying down. You haven't heard the last of me, Holbrook." His brow furrowed, but before he could respond, I spun on my heel and stormed out of the office, the door slamming behind me with a resounding finality. As I stalked down the hallway, ignoring the curious stares of my former colleagues, a single thought consumed me: revenge. Meredith had struck the first blow, but I would be the one to deliver the killing stroke. No more playing nice, no more suppressing my fury. It was time to unleash the fury that had been simmering within me, Time to make that wretched woman pay for her treachery in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. She thought she could strip away my livelihood, my pride, my future with a few well-placed lies and some corporate backstabbing. She was wrong, dead wrong. By the time I was through with her, Meredith would wish she'd never crossed paths with Marlene Carter. Her world was about to come crashing down around her, and I would savor every agonizing second of her downfall. The dimly lit bar was a far cry from the glittering social circles I'd grown accustomed to, but as I nursed my whiskey sour, I found solace in the anonymity it provided. No judging stares, no thinly veiled insults, just the comforting hum of like-minded souls seeking refuge from the world beyond these weathered walls. Marlene Carter? The gruff voice snapped me from my reverie, and I turned to find a ruggedly handsome man regarding me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. His steel-gray eyes betrayed a lifetime of hardship, but there was a fierceness about him that commanded respect. "Do I know you?" I countered, my fingers tightening around my glass. The man slid onto the bar stool beside me, signaling the bartender for a drink of his own. "Name's Jack Morgan. I used to be Meredith Vanderbilt's business partner, before that snake in the grass stabbed me in the back." My breath caught in my throat as realization dawned. Here was a kindred spirit, another victim of Meredith's ruthless machinations. "So you're familiar with her special brand of treachery, then?" I stated, raising my glass in a sardonic toast. Jack snorted derisively, accepting the tumbler of whiskey the bartender slid his way. "That's putting it mildly. That woman would sell her own grandmother if there was a profit to be made." A humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "Believe me, I know exactly what you mean." I paused, studying him intently. "What did she do to you?" Jack's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around his glass as he drained half its contents in one gulp. "We had a lucrative real estate venture in the works. High-end condos, prime location, the whole 9 yards. But right before closing, that snake pulled the rug out from under me." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Turns out she'd been funneling funds from our partnership into her own offshore accounts. By the time I caught wind of it, she'd drained me dry and left me holding the bag for the entire project." Rage simmered within me as I listened to his tale, all too familiar with the devastation Meredith's greed could wreak. "She did something similar to me," I admitted, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Used her influence to get me fired from my engineering job, all because she didn't approve of my relationship with her nephew." Jack's eyes widened, and he let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's cold-blooded, even for her." A charged silence stretched between us, each of us lost in the bitter memories of Meredith's betrayal. But as I drained the last of my drink, a newfound determination took root. "You know, Jack, I think it's time we taught that witch a lesson she'll never forget." His brows shot up, curiosity flickering across his weathered features. "You got a plan, sweetheart?" The corners of my lips curled into a predatory grin. "As a matter of fact, I do, but we'll need to gather a few more contributors to the cause." Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes, and he nodded slowly, a matching grin spreading across his rugged face. "Name the time and place, darlin'. I'll be there with bells on." As I slid off the bar stool, Jack fell into step beside me. A silent pact forged between us. Meredith Vanderbilt's reckoning was nigh. Over the next few days, I scoured every corner of the city, seeking out those who had fallen victim to her insatiable greed and callous disregard for anyone outside her elite circle. One by one, they emerged from the shadows, united in their thirst for retribution. By week's end, a veritable army had assembled, a motley crew of the downtrodden and disenfranchised, all bearing the scars of Meredith's betrayal. As I surveyed the unlikely alliance, a fierce determination burned within me. No more hiding in the shadows, cowering in fear of that woman's wrath. It was time to drag her sins into the light, to make her answer for the lives she'd so carelessly crushed beneath her designer heels. Meredith Vanderbilt's reign of terror was about to come to a brutal, humiliating end, and I would be the one to deliver the killing blow, once and for all. The dank basement reeked of mold and stale cigarette smoke, but it was the perfect clandestine hideaway to plot our next move against Meredith. As my ragtag crew of co-conspirators trickled in, a hush fell over the dimly lit space. "All right, listen up," I barked, my voice carrying an edge that commanded attention. "We're here to bring that snake, Meredith Vanderbilt, to her knees, once and for all." A chorus of murmurs and nods rippled through the group, their expressions hardened with shared determination. Jack Morgan stepped forward, his steely gaze sweeping over the assembly. "We've all felt the sting of her treachery," he growled, "but talk is cheap. We need hard evidence to nail her haughty ass to the wall." "He's right," chimed in a wiry man I'd come to know as Paul Jennings. "That woman's got more lawyers than sense. Without proof, she'll just bury us." A tense silence hung in the air, the weight of Paul's words sinking in. But just as doubt began to creep in, a soft voice piped up from the back of the room. "I might be able to help with that." All eyes turned toward the speaker, a mousy young woman with a wariness etched into her delicate features. Emily, if my memory served me correctly. "You've got something on Meredith?" I pressed, leaning forward with rapt interest. Emily's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers twisting anxiously in her lap. "I used to be her personal assistant," she began, her voice little more than a whisper. "I saw things, heard things I shouldn't have." Jack arched a skeptical brow. "You got proof to back that up, kid?" Rather than responding, Emily reached into her tattered purse and extracted a battered manila folder. My heart skipped a beat as she laid it on the table before us, the damning contents spilling out onto the scarred wooden surface. "Phone recordings," she murmured, gesturing to the neatly labeled cassette tapes. "Financial statements, offshore account details, everything you'd need to bury that witch once and for all." A reverent hush blanketed the room as we digested the treasure trove before us. This was it, the smoking gun we needed to bring Meredith's empire crumbling down around her. "How did you get this?" I breathed, my fingers trembling as I rifled through the meticulous documentation. Emily's haunted gaze met mine, a shadow passing over her delicate features. "Let's just say, I paid a heavy price." The implication hung heavy in the stale air, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifices we'd all endured at Meredith's merciless hands. But as I studied the damning evidence laid out before me, a newfound determination took root. "Not anymore," I stated, my voice low but laced with steel. "This is our chance to make that monster answer for her crimes, once and for all." A chorus of grim nods and murmurs of assent rippled through the group. Jack slammed his calloused hand down on the table, his expression set in a grim mask of resolve. "So, what's the play, boss? How do we take this bitch down for good?" My lips curved into a predatory grin, a feral glint in my eye. "We hit her where it hurts most, her precious reputation." As the details of my meticulously crafted plan unfurled, a palpable sense of anticipation crackled in the air. This was more than just revenge. It was justice, long overdue. Meredith Vanderbilt had reigned over her ivory tower for far too long, lording her wealth and status over those she deemed inferior. But her reign of terror was about to come to a brutal, humiliating end. By the time we were through with her, that smug, self-satisfied sneer would be wiped from her perfectly Botoxed face for good. She would know the sting of public shame, the bitter taste of karmic retribution. And as for me, I would savor every agonizing second of her downfall, reveling in the sweet nectar of hard-won vengeance. After all, the best revenge is that which is served piping hot straight from the ashes of a life in ruins. The grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the impeccably dressed guests. But beneath the veneer of wealth and status, a storm was brewing, a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Meredith Vanderbilt's gilded empire. As I slipped through the crowd, a flute of champagne in hand, my gaze settled on the woman of the hour. Meredith held court at the center of the room, resplendent in a designer gown that likely cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her perfectly coiffed blonde tresses and immaculate makeup did little to conceal the avarice simmering behind her icy blue eyes. "Marlene, darling," she trilled, that saccharine smile plastered across her expertly Botoxed features. "So good of you to join us." I forced a tight-lipped smile, nodding in greeting as I sidled up beside her. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Meredith. After all, it's not every day one gets to bask in the radiance of New York's elite." So her tinkling laugh grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard, but I schooled my features into a mask of polite amusement. Little did she know, the game was already afoot. As the evening progressed, I kept a watchful eye on my co-conspirators, scattered strategically throughout the ballroom. Jack Morgan caught my gaze from across the room, giving me the slightest of nods, a silent signal that all was in readiness. My heart thrummed with anticipation as I awaited the appointed hour, sipping my champagne and exchanging pleasantries with the well-heeled guests. But when the grand clock chimed midnight, a hush fell over the revelry. It was time. Clearing my throat, I tapped my glass with a fork, the ringing sound cutting through the silence like a knife. All eyes swiveled in my direction, curiosity and disdain warring on the faces of Meredith's elite circle. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," I began, my voice ringing out with a confidence I didn't truly feel. "There's something you all need to see." With a subtle nod, the lights dimmed and a massive projection screen flickered to life behind me. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as the first image appeared, a candid shot of Meredith, cold hard cash spilling from her perfectly manicured hands. "What is the meaning of this?" she sputtered, her perfectly sculpted features contorting with outrage. I merely arched a brow, turning to face the screen as the incriminating evidence began to unspool in vivid detail. Bank statements, offshore accounts, footage of backdoor dealings, a veritable treasure trove of Meredith's misdeeds, laid bare for all to see. With each damning revelation, the ballroom descended deeper into chaos. Shouts and accusations rang out, punctuated by Meredith's increasingly shrill denials. But the pièce de résistance was yet to come. As the final audio recording crackled to life, a deathly hush blanketed the room. Meredith's own voice, smug and condescending, filled the cavernous space. "And once that little nobody is out of the picture, the company will be ours for the taking. Just a few more well-placed lies, and she'll be finished." The color drained from Meredith's face as the recording played on, detailing her insidious plot to systematically dismantle my career, my life, all for the sake of greed and status. Silence reigned in the wake of the final damning words. All eyes turned toward the disgraced socialite, her perfectly sculpted facade crumbling before our very eyes. In that moment, I relished the look of abject horror etched into her features. The mighty Meredith Vanderbilt, brought low by the very transgressions that had once elevated her to the pinnacles of power. As the whispers and murmurs swelled, I stepped forward, drawing myself to my full height. "The game is up, Meredith," I declared, my voice ringing out over the chaos. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Her gaze met mine, a maelstrom of fury and disbelief swirling in those icy depths. But I held her stare, unflinching, as the crowd closed in around us. A pack of wolves descending upon their fallen prey. In that moment, I knew the sweet taste of victory, of hard-won vengeance. Meredith's world was crumbling around her, and I would savor every agonizing second of her descent into disgrace. This was more than just retribution. It was justice, long overdue. And as the once mighty Meredith Vanderbilt was led away in shame, I couldn't help but let a triumphant smile spread across my lips. The Queen was dead. Long live the new reign. The air hung thick with tension in the wake of Meredith's very public undoing. As the disgraced socialite was led away by security, her perfectly coiffed veneer in shambles, a deafening silence blanketed the ballroom. I stood rooted in place, my chest heaving with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. For so long I had dreamed of this moment. The day when Meredith Vanderbilt's reign of terror would finally come crashing down around her. And now, it was a reality. Slowly, the stunned guests began to stir, whispers and murmurs rippling through the crowd like the first tremors of an approaching storm. All eyes turned toward Ethan and his family, their expressions ranging from shock to outright horror. Ethan's mother, Evelyn, was the first to break the silence, her trembling voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Ethan?" she stammered, her perfectly made-up features ashen. "Did you know about this?" Ethan could only shake his head mutely, his eyes wide and haunted as the weight of his aunt's betrayal settled over him like a shroud. "Of course he didn't," I interjected, stepping forward to stand at his side. "Meredith's lies and manipulation have poisoned this family for far too long." Evelyn's gaze snapped to me, a flicker of anger burning behind her eyes. "And I suppose you're the innocent party in all this?" I met her accusatory glare head-on, unwavering. "I'm the one who exposed the truth that your precious Meredith has been bleeding this family dry for years." A hushed gasp rippled through the crowd, and I could see the horror dawning on Evelyn's face as the realization set in. Her carefully curated world was crumbling, the cracks in the foundation laid bare for all to see. Ethan's father, Richard, stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "How dare you come into our home and make such slanderous accusations?" His anger rolled off him in waves, but I held my ground, emboldened by the knowledge that I held the moral high ground. "It's not slander if it's the truth," I countered, my voice ringing out over the stunned silence. "Everything you saw tonight came straight from Meredith's own mouth, her own bank accounts." As if on cue, Jack Morgan emerged from the crowd, the damning evidence clutched in his weathered hands. "We've got the receipts, pal," he growled, tossing the files onto the nearest table with a resounding thud. "Your aunt's been running a game on you for years, and you were too blind to see it." Richard's face contorted with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. But before he could unleash his fury, Ethan's voice cut through the tension, soft but laced with steel. "Enough." All eyes turned toward him, drawn by the quiet authority in that single word. Ethan's shoulders were squared, his jaw set in a grim line as he surveyed the scene before him. "For too long, I've stood by and let this family's toxic behavior poison everything it touches," he stated, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "Well, no more." He turned to me then, his eyes brimming with a cocktail of emotions, shame, regret, but also a newfound sense of resolve. "Marlene, you were right all along," he murmured, taking my hand in his. "I was blind to the truth, but you risked everything to open my eyes." A hushed silence fell over the room as Ethan drew me into a fierce embrace, his lips brushing against my temple in a tender gesture. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for setting me free." In that moment, the weight of everything we'd endured seemed to lift from my shoulders. The battles had been fought, the war won, and in the end, our love had emerged victorious. As I returned Ethan's embrace, I caught a glimpse of Meredith over his shoulder. Her immaculate facade was shattered, her perfectly sculpted features twisted into a mask of impotent rage. Our eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, I saw the bitter truth laid bare. She had lost her power, her wealth, her stranglehold over this family. And as the security guards hauled her away, I couldn't help but savor the sweet taste of her comeuppance. The mighty Meredith Vanderbilt had fallen, and from her ashes, a new beginning would rise, one built on truth, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family forged by fire. This was more than just revenge. It was deliverance, a chance to shed the toxic legacy of the past and embrace a future untainted by greed and deceit. And as Ethan's family slowly began to rally around us, their eyes filled with newfound clarity, I knew that our greatest victory lay not in Meredith's downfall, but in the healing that would follow in its wake. The weight of Meredith's treachery had finally been lifted, but the path forward was still shrouded in uncertainty. As Ethan and I stood side by side, surveying the wreckage of his once pristine family empire, a heavy silence hung in the air. "What happens now?" Ethan's voice was little more than a whisper, laced with a mixture of relief and trepidation. I turned to face him, my hand finding his in a reassuring squeeze. "Now we pick up the pieces and build something better, something stronger than anything Meredith could have ever imagined." A flicker of hope kindled in his eyes, and he nodded slowly, his grip tightening around my fingers. "You're right," he murmured. "We can't undo the past, but we can forge a new path, one free from her toxic influence." A soft cough interrupted our moment, and we turned to find Ethan's father, Richard, regarding us with a guarded expression. "Son," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you both an apology." Ethan stiffened beside me, but I gave his hand a gentle squeeze, silently urging him to hear his father out. Richard's gaze dropped to the floor, shame etching deep lines into his weathered features. "For too long, I turned a blind eye to Meredith's machinations. I allowed her greed and ambition to poison this family, all in the name of preserving our legacy." He raised his eyes to meet ours, and I was struck by the raw vulnerability shining there. "But you, Marlene, you had the courage to stand up to her, to expose the truth we were all too afraid to face." He exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you for setting us free." The sincerity in his words hung heavy in the air, and I could see the weight of years of oppression lifting from Ethan's shoulders. Slowly, He nodded, accepting his father's apology with a quiet grace. "It's going to take time to heal," he acknowledged. "But we have a chance now. A chance to rebuild on a foundation of honesty and trust." Richard's lips curved into a tentative smile, and he extended a hand toward me. "Then let's start anew as a family, all of us together." I accepted his proffered hand, sealing the pact with a firm shake. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of clarity. This was more than just the end of Meredith's reign. It was the beginning of a new era, one built on the bonds of love and the unshakable strength of unity. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and I watched as the remnants of Meredith's empire crumbled around us. Lawsuits were filed, assets were seized, and the once mighty Vanderbilt name became synonymous with shame and disgrace. But through it all, we stood resolute, determined to rise from the ashes and forge a path untainted by greed or manipulation. With the help of our newfound allies, Jack, Emily, and the others who had suffered at Meredith's hands, we set about rebuilding, not just a business, but a legacy built on integrity and honor. Gone were the days of backroom deals and underhanded tactics. In their place, we ushered in an era of transparency and ethical practices, determined to prove that success could be achieved through hard work and unwavering principles. And as our fledgling enterprise began to take flight, something even more profound took root: the healing of a family long fractured by Meredith's poisonous influence. Ethan's parents, once so deeply entrenched in the toxic culture of wealth and status, found solace in our new way of life. Gone were the extravagant parties and ostentatious displays of excess, replaced by quiet family dinners and heartfelt conversations. It was during these moments, as we gathered around the table, sharing laughter and rekindling the bonds that had been strained to the breaking point, that I truly understood the depth of our victory. We had not only defeated Meredith's schemes, we had triumphed over the very ideals she held so dear: greed, status, and the relentless pursuit of power at all costs. In their place, we had cultivated something far more precious: a life rooted in love, honesty, and the unbreakable strength of family. As I looked around the table, taking in the smiles and the easy camaraderie, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be paved with challenges and obstacles, but we would face them together, united by the bonds we had forged in the fires of adversity. Meredith's reign of terror was over, and in its place, a new legacy was being born, one built on the foundations of truth, resilience, and the unwavering belief that love, in the end, would always conquer all.